The big spin is one of the most stylish tricks in fingerboarding. To clear up any confusion, a big spin is when the board does a 360 rotation away from you and your fingers do a 180 in the same direction. In other words, a big spin is a combination of a back 180 and a pop shove. And while you can do a big spin with a shove that rotates along the ground, getting the board in the air is significantly harder. But before we get our board in the air, let's start with the basics. Step number 1, where to put your fingers. First, you want to place your index finger in the middle of the board and your middle finger on the tail of the board. Some people find it easier to have their middle finger on the middle of the tail, but for me personally, I find it's easier to have your middle finger on the edge of the tail that's furthest away from you. Step number 2, how to shove it revert. A shove it revert is a big spin that doesn't pop in the air. Getting used to doing these is key to learning how to do a popped big spin. To do this trick, you want to use your middle finger to pull the tail of the board towards you, which will cause the board to rotate away from you. Make sure to push down on the tail when you do this so that your front wheels come up, because this will make it much easier to spin the board. Then you want to turn your hand in the same direction that the board is spinning and land on the board riding backwards. Think of it like you're crossing your fingers and you're swinging your middle finger behind your index finger. A good thing to practice with the shove it revert is trying to keep your index finger on the board the entire time. The trick here is to not put too much pressure on your index finger so that the board can still rotate, and lifting your index finger just enough so that the board stays under your fingers the entire time. While your index finger doesn't really do anything when it comes to doing a shove it revert, learning to keep it on the board as the board spins is really going to help with doing a proper big spin and keep it flat in the air so that it doesn't flip over. One thing to keep in mind is you don't have to completely turn your hand so your palm is facing away from you. What a lot of people do to make the rotation easier and make the landing look more stylish is bend their middle finger and keep their index finger straight. That way your index finger and middle finger are still landing in the same position on the board, but you can keep your hand and wrist turned at a 90-degree angle rather than twisting them the full 180 degrees. Step number 3, popping the board. To do a big spin, you're essentially doing a back 180 and a pop shove at the same time. So if you haven't already, check out my pop shove and back 180 tutorials so you can master those first. The key to this trick is to not think so much about scooping the tail against the ground to get it to spin, and to instead focus on popping the tail against the ground to get it into the air. I like to think of it as if I'm doing a simple back 180 but pulling my index finger towards me as I pop, rather than scraping the tail against the ground to get it to start spinning. Another trick that can help with the pop is to have your middle finger hanging slightly over the edge that's furthest away from you. This will naturally make the board want to spin away from you more, so you can really focus on getting a solid pop of the tail against the ground. One trick that can help you get used to the rotation of a big spin is to start with your wrist turned towards you so that your palm is facing away from you. Then all you have to do is do a big spin and turn your wrist back to normal. And while this is a lot easier because you don't have to land on the board backwards with your wrist twisted, it's not really a true big spin. So feel free to practice this step to get the hang of big spins, but you eventually want to work your way up to doing a big spin from your regular stance and then landing on the board facing backwards. A good way to ease your way into doing a proper big spin is by putting your board out in front of you so that the nose is pointing towards you and you're riding towards your body. That way you don't have to turn your wrist as much. Once you get comfortable doing big spins from this position, you can gradually start to turn your wrist more and more back to your regular ollie position. One thing that really helped me when I was first learning this trick was before I pop the tail, I curve the board towards the direction I'm about to 180 in. That way I can get some momentum going and I can use that to do the full 180 rotation with my hand and wrist. This also helps because by turning in the direction we're about to spin, we don't actually have to do the full 180 and we can pop at a 45-degree angle. The key to this trick is to lead the rotation with your index finger to make sure that the board follows your fingers in the air. As long as your front trucks are turning and doing the full rotation, the rest of your board will follow. For some people, it can really help to look at this trick from a different perspective. For me personally, it really helped to think of this trick as a 360 pop shove with a body varial because I'm a lot better at 360 pop shoves than I am at regular pop shoves. I also have a tutorial on how to do 360 pop shoves, so I highly recommend you check that out as well. But if you're still struggling with getting the rotation, try doing a big spin by breaking down the individual parts of the trick in different ways. Another example of this would be to do a pop shove and then land on your nose so you can pivot the rest of the 180. Or you could do a pop shove and land at a 90-degree angle so that you can power slide the rest of the 180. This will help you get used to the rotation, and you can eventually work your way up to rotating your board and hand in the air without having to slide your wheels on the ground. The finger positioning is also super important for this trick because having our middle finger on the edge of the board that's furthest away from us is going to make the board want to flip like a heel flip when we pop. And having our index finger in the middle of the board is going to want to make the board flip like a kick flip, so the two cancel each other out, keeping the board flat in the air, which is really going to help us for the next part of this trick. Step number 4, leveling out the board in the air. With a big spin that rotates along the ground, you don't really need to use your index finger because your wheels are on the ground, which helps the board stay flat and prevent it from flipping over. But with a popped big spin, the board naturally wants to flip over, so you need to use your index finger to prevent that from happening. The most common problem that people run into when trying this trick is accidentally doing a big spin flip. Even moving your index index finger off the board for a fraction of a second can be enough time to cause it to flip. So you want to try to keep your index finger on the board the entire time and follow it with your hand as it pops into the air. This is definitely the hardest part about this trick. I've seen some tutorials that say you want to apply pressure onto your index finger, but whenever I try to do that, it just does a big spin flip. I like to think of it as you're popping the board into your index finger and then using your hand to follow the board in the air so that your index finger never leaves the grip tape. I personally don't put any pressure on my index finger, and I just focus on keeping it on the grip tape the entire time so that the board doesn't flip. Another tip that can really help is to think about pointing your index finger down at the ground as the board spins. This is going to help the board wrap around your finger and will make it a bit easier to keep your fingers on the grip tape the entire time. Step number 5, consistency. Big spins are one of those tricks that like to go all over the place. It took me a long time to be able to land them every try, so here's a few helpful tricks that I learned to pop them higher and land them more consistently. If you find that your big spins are over rotating and spinning more like a 540 shove, try turning your fingers away from you. This is going to slow down the spin a lot and give you a lot more control over the board. When you have your fingers straight on the board or turned towards you, the board naturally wants to spin more and it tends to not stay directly under your fingers. If your big spins are flipping over like a big spin flip, try to not overcomplicate things and focus on doing a simple back 180 but have your fingers in the big spin position. That way you're not going to accidentally flick the board with your index finger and it will help you keep the board flat in the air. Focusing on doing just a back 180 can also help if you're still over rotating the board. That way we're not forcing it to spin, and the way our fingers are positioned will naturally want to make the board spin away from you. Another tip is to keep your index finger directly in the center of the board. If you have your index finger too close to you, the board will want to flip over. By placing our index finger directly in the center of the board, it makes it a lot harder for the board to flip and will help keep the board flat in the air. You really want to get the board to wrap around your index finger as it rotates in the air. When you're doing a big spin flip, your index finger leaves the board for a split second, which causes it to flip. So focus on keeping your index finger on the grip tape the entire time so you can really feel it wrap around your finger. Big spins really show off your skill and control on a fingerboard. A lot of people skip learning them properly because it's a lot easier to do a big spin flip. But for me personally, big spins are one of my favorite tricks. And if you want to learn some other easy tricks, check out my other tutorials like my 1-hour video where I explain every basic fingerboarding trick in detail. Once you master all of those tricks, you'll be looking like a fingerboard pro in no time. And let me know if there's any other tricks you'd like me to teach you guys in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more tutorials like this.